We're often told that ADHD is a lifelong neurodevelopmental disorder, primarily genetic, rooted in brain chemistry, and managed with structured support or medication. But if you've spent some time around children with ADHD, you may have noticed something more complex. Why do symptoms look different in different environments? Why do some children thrive in certain settings and struggle in others? In this episode, we're going to take a thoughtful look at what ADHD actually is, what science tells us, where there is debate, and what environmental factors may influence attention and behavior. We'll examine the data, the diagnostic criteria, and the real-world patterns so you can better understand what ADHD means and what it doesn't. For those who are new here, my name is Afrad Amira. I'm a mom of 3 boys ages 4, 8, and 12. I'm a parenting coach, and I'm passionate about integrating ideas from ancient wisdom into the way that we parent our children today. So if you enjoy this type of content, please press the like button below so others can find it as well. Now let's dive in. So what is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder? I'm going to walk you through the narrative debate around ADHD. First, we're going to examine the mainstream narrative nowadays, what most people think when they think about ADHD. So this is from the National Resource Center on ADHD. It's a program of CHAD. CHAD is the biggest nonprofit organization that deals with ADHD. CHAD is short for Children and Adults with ADHD. So what does this center say that ADHD is? Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, ADHD, is a neurodevelopmental disorder affecting 11% of school-aged children. Symptoms continue into adulthood. In more than 3/4 of cases, ADHD is characterized by developmentally inappropriate levels of inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. Let's see the definition of the CDC. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, ADHD, is one of the most common neurodevelopmental disorders of childhood. Now, if we look at what are the symptoms of ADHD according to the National Resource Center on ADHD, so we can see that ADHD has a predominantly inattentive presentation and a predominantly hyperactive impulsive presentation. So what is the inattentive presentation? Fails to give close attention to details or makes careless mistakes, has difficulty sustaining attention, does not appear to listen, struggles to follow through with instructions, has difficulty with organization, avoids or dislikes tasks requiring sustained mental effort, loses things, is easily distracted, is forgetful in daily activities. In the predominantly hyperactive impulse presentation, we can see fidgets with hands or feet or squirms in chair, has difficulty remaining seated, runs about or climbs excessively in children, or extreme restlessness in adults, difficulty engaging in activities quietly, acts as if driven by motor, talks excessively, blurts out answers before questions have been completed, difficulty waiting or taking turns, interrupts or intrudes upon others. There can be a combination of these two presentations together. The individual meets the criteria for both inattention or hyperactive impulsive ADHD presentation. All right, so the CDC more or less presents the same type of symptoms, inattentive and hyperactive or combined. Now, what is the treatment that these organizations recommend? Parent and child education about diagnostics and treatment, parent training in behavior management techniques, medications, school programming and support, child and family therapy to address personal or family stress concerns. The CDC recommends behavior therapy and medication. Now, I was looking into understanding how many of the children are actually medicated and how many of them receive the behavioral therapy treatment. So 50% of children are taking ADHD medication. Now, just so we understand the numbers, it is estimated that 7 million U.S. children ages 3 to 17 years have been diagnosed with ADHD, according to a national survey of parents using data from 2022. I want to stop this episode for a second and talk about two things that are happening in our society right now that are really troubling. The first is that parents have started to lose their confidence in parenting. They started to believe that every little issue that they have with their children, they have to seek out an expert in order to cure their child, in order to heal their child. So parents just stopped believing that they have the capacity and the capability to deal with raising their own children. The second troubling thing that is happening is that the prevalence of anxiety, depression, ADHD in children is skyrocketing. Now, this has many reasons, but one of the main reasons is overparenting, because overparenting creates children that are inconfident, insecure, not resilient, and weak, and just don't have what it takes in order to deal with life's challenges. Because of these two social phenomena, I created a program that is called Becoming Leaders, Raising Leaders. In this program, I take you through a 10-week process where you step into your natural role as a benevolent leader of your children. You create a vision for yourself. We work on creating a strong family culture, one that will embed your child in meaning. And we talk about many parenting tools that will help you raise children that are going to be resilient, strong, capable, confident, and ones that will take leadership and ownership over their own life. You can find all the details for this program in the link below. Now let's go back to the episode. Now, how is ADHD diagnosed? ADHD can be diagnosed by a mental health professional like a psychologist or psychiatrist, or by a primary care provider like a pediatrician. In my research for this, I came across this paper, which is from the American Academy of Pediatrics. It's a clinical practical guideline for the diagnosis, evaluation, and treatment of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in children and adolescents. So for preschool-aged children, the primary care clinician should prescribe evidence-based parent and or teacher-administered behavior therapy as the first line of treatment, and may prescribe methylphenidate if the behavior interventions do not provide significant improvement and there is moderate to severe continuing disturbance in the child's function. For elementary school age children 6 to 11 years, the primary care clinician should prescribe U.S. Food and Drug Administration approved medication for ADHD and or evidence-based parent and or teacher-administered behavior therapy as treatment for ADHD, preferably both. For adolescents ages 12 to 18, should prescribe Food and Drug Administration approved medication for ADHD with the assent of the adolescents, and may prescribe behavior therapy as treatment for ADHD, preferably both. So if we look at this mainstream definition of ADHD is seen as a disorder. It's defined by pathology and dysfunction. It's a deficit. It's a lack of attention or regulation. The symptoms are inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. And our goal as parents, teachers, and clinicians is treatment and symptom reduction. Now, in this episode, what I want to suggest is that the narrative, the way that we see the issue, has a huge implication on how we will interpret what we are seeing. So if our story is that ADHD is a mental disorder, is a neurodevelopmental problem, is a deficit, then clearly it means that we need to help these children overcome this deficit, because it's gonna be for their detriment in the long run. And it already has a bad influence over their life. The thing is that this narrative stands put only if we see human success and flourishing through a very narrow lens. If we think that success in life means that you have to be successful academically and means that you have to get good grades in school and be accepted to a good college and then get a good job, then yeah, maybe that narrative can work, right? Because if a child is not successful in a school setting, it means that it may be detrimental for him for his whole life. But if we change the narrative, if we start to look at success from a different lens, we may start to see ADHD through a different lens as well. So there are limits when we see this deficit-based model ADHD. We are defining a brain type solely by what it cannot do, and we're ignoring how it actually functions. The medical model views natural variance as brokenness, creating stigma and ignoring the context. So what do I want to suggest instead? I want us to I want us to maybe open our minds to a different narrative. And this different narrative is something that has been established by many researchers all over the world, and they are proposing a different way of looking at ADHD. One of the books that are very interesting is called ADHD, A Hunter's in a Farmer's World. This is a book by Tom Hartman, and basically he proposes that ADHD is not a disorder, it's a difference. People with ADHD may simply have a different cognitive wiring, not broken brains. And rather than seeing these traits as deficits, Hartman suggests they may have strength worth nurturing. And what he suggests is that in the past, when we were living in a hunter-gatherer community, people with ADHD most likely had an advantage because their distractibility made them hyper-vigilant, and their impulsivity made them rapid decision makers. And they were stimulation seeking, so they were alert and they were ready to defend the tribe, and they were ready to go and hunt. So these traits would have been advantages in a hunter-gatherer world. But in our present world, in our modern environment, modern schools and workplaces are structured for steady, routine-focused farmer traits, which helps explain why people with ADHD often struggle in systems and don't align with their natural strength. So it's just interesting to see how different traits are interpreted in different ways, in different times, in different cultures, and through a different lens. So basically, this third paradigm is the neurodiversity paradigm. The concept is that neurodiversity posits the difference in human brain function regarding sociability, learning, attention, and mood, and normal variation in the human genome. The key shift is that ADHD is not a glitch in the system. It is a distinct operation system designed for a different set of parameters. So it makes us shift the lens from pathology to variance. When we change our lens, we change the language, we change the way that we understand the underlying mechanics of the issue that is presented before our eyes. So if we see it as a pathology, we're asking ourselves what is wrong and how we can fix it. But if we see it as a variance, we can try to be curious and understand how does it work and what does it need. Another interesting book that aligns with this narrative is ADHD is not an illness and Ritalin is not a cure, a comprehensive rebuttal of the alleged scientific consensus. This is a book by Yaakov Ophir, and in this book, he disputes the notion of ADHD as an illness, and then he explains why Ritalin is not the cure. What he argues that in order for a behavior to be classified as a mental disorder, it must satisfy the 4 Ds: deviance, dysfunction, danger, and distress. He shows throughout the first part of his book how ADHD does not fit any one of these criteria. But what I want to show you here is the deviance analysis. And this is very interesting because you don't have to be a medical professional in order to understand this on a common sense level. If 10 to 20% of the population has this mental disease, then it cannot be abnormal, right? Because for something to be considered abnormal, it has to be something that only a very small fraction of society has. In the psychiatric world, in order for a behavior to be defined as a mental illness, it has to present itself in less than 2% or even 1% of the total population. Now, ADHD is seen in between 10 to 20% of the population, depends on what research you're looking at. So Just by looking at this criteria, we can see that it cannot be that ADHD is a mental illness because it cannot be understood as abnormal behavior. Another leading expert in the field is Dr. Daniel Amen, and he has Amen clinics. These are clinics that are spread throughout the United States. Dr. Amen also has a book called Healing ADD. In this book, he breaks down 7 different types of ADHD, and although his point of view is more closely related to the mainstream notion that ADHD is a developmental disorder, he does say, and I heard him say in more than one instance, that ADHD is not an illness, it's just different wiring of the brain. So we have to understand that the context that we see things determine the functionality. If we are in a high stimulant context, ADHD traits can function as a superpower. If we are in a low stimulant context, the same traits appear as a disorder. The impairment is relational, it's not intrinsic, meaning that the environment is what determines whether the child or the ADHD adult has a problem rather than the problem itself. Another interesting book is The Myth of the ADHD Child by Thomas Armstrong. And I didn't read this book yet, but he does have a very interesting YouTube series where he talks about how we can understand ADHD differently if we look at ADHD through a different lens and we look at ADHD through a different narrative. And it very much fits in with the narrative that ADHD in and of itself is not a disease. It's more the context that these children are put in that makes it a deficit for them. What do I want to suggest? I want to suggest an alternative definition of ADHD. ADHD may be better understood as a particular way of thinking or as a complex personal trait, one that includes both strengths and challenges, rather than a true medical disorder. It requires novelty, challenge, and urgency to engage. It offers unique capabilities in divergent thinking, hyperfocus, and adaptability. We have to understand, support, and adapt. Instead of suppressing behaviors with drugs, labels, or coercion, we must adapt to the way that the child's brain naturally works. Be an advocate for their nature, not the enforcer of the system. I want to summarize and say that the lens through which you choose to view the situation will determine what you see. If you choose to see ADHD through a medical lens and see it as a mental illness, then it's clearly that you need to help your child by medicating them or taking them to therapy. But if you change that lens and understand that this may be just a normal behavior and that the environment that your child is in is not suitable for him, then the way that you will approach it will be completely different. We need to understand that millions of children are medicated because we are holding on to that mainstream narrative. And those medications are not benign. I'm creating another episode that talks about the side effects of this medication. Subscribe to the channel so you'll get a notification when that one comes out. And if you want to understand what are some different parenting strategies that you can use in order to help your ADHD child without necessarily using medication, check out another episode where I talk exactly about that. You can find the link right here.